Okay, let's begin. Well, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this Placemaking for Town Centres webinar. My name's Jen Heel. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive here at the Design Commission for Wales. If this is the first of the webinars that you're joining us for, welcome. We're producing webinars focusing on placemaking in town centres, particular focus for Welsh town centres. And this is one of a series of webinars that we've done. So we've been holding them monthly since September, and we've been looking at embedding placemaking in local authorities, promoting private sector investment in town centres, empowering communities, and today we're looking at tackling vacant units. If you've missed the previous ones, they are available on the DCFW YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search Design Commission for Wales, you should find them on there. If you've not come across that already. So today, as I mentioned, we're looking at tackling vacant units. Obviously, this is a big issue and a huge challenge faced by many town centres as the way we shop and retail habits have changed, and the demise of some national retailers on the high street and a kind of generally challenging business environment. This has created issues in many town centres around vacancies, where some of those businesses have moved out. A common feature in many places that we're aware of, where we've been looking at placemaking plans, not everywhere, but I would say the majority. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and we can't possibly fix it all in an hour lunchtime session. But what we're going to be focusing on today is how to think about this issue and tackle it from a placemaking perspective. And what I mean by that is thinking about it in a way that is distinctive to the place that you're looking at, that works with the people of that place and focuses on driving up demand and activity within that place to support its life. So I'm very pleased to be joined by two guest speakers today who will be sharing their examples of such an approach, and the way they've explored and tested ideas to ensure that the High Street remains an engaging and active place for residents and visitors. So I'm joined by Ben Reynolds, who's the founder of Urban Foundry, a creative regeneration agency based in Swansea, and also Wendy Maiden, who's a principal urban designer in the regeneration team at Bath and North East Somerset Council, and is also a design review panelist and chair with us at the Design Commission. They're each going to give us a presentation overview of their experience and some of the ideas and actions they've been taking in this area. And then we'll have time for discussion and questions at the end. So if along the way you could drop any questions or points that you want to raise, or if you've got some examples that you want to share, drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll pick them up and I'll put them to the speakers at the end so that we can get some discussion going. All of this session will be recorded and you can watch it back or share it with others at the end if you think somebody would benefit from watching it back. So I will stop sharing my screen and invite Ben to share his screen and hand over to him for the first presentation. Thanks, Ben.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jen. Can you just give me the quick thumbs up to say you can see that? Excellent.
Yeah,
okay, so hello everybody. My name is Ben Reynolds. I'm founder and director of Urban Foundry. We're based in Swansea, 20 years old this year. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing around pop-ups, meanwhile spaces across Wales. I just have to get a plug in at the beginning because the logo police will be on me if I don't, is that actually a lot of this work, although it's not funded directly to us, it is paid for its source by UK government through the Levelling Up funding via SPF. And so just to give the plug and the credit in there early on. So The pop-up spaces arise from our broader work in urban regeneration. So very broadly, what we do is we take a mixture of creative thinking, a theoretical understanding about how and why towns and cities work the way they do, and also a kind of a very pragmatic, socially entrepreneurial approach that we don't just write hypothetical reports about it. We actually do projects in places to try and actually enact that regeneration. And what that takes the form of is sort of four broad areas. One is around stakeholder engagement. One is around what I broadly call viability support, which is kind of how are we going to make this work? How are we going to make it financially wash its face? How are we going to finance it? But also, how is it going to be socially sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable? The third area is what everybody thinks regeneration is, which is part of it, which is the bricks and mortar stuff, which is kind of the more sort of physical placemaking things, from pop-up events through to urban design, through to kind of building projects. And then the fourth area there in the bottom right there is working. That was the Wellbeing Future Generations Commissioner's Office. It's just before Christmas. We do a lot of work around impact evaluation, which is articulating what it is you're trying to achieve, what it is you want to change, and what you do. And what's slightly different about us with some of the others in our field is, as well as doing that for other people, we do it for ourselves. And one of the things that we started to do for ourselves is set up pop-up projects in empty spaces, and we've been doing that for about 20 years, doing the odd project here and there where we just thought it's a nice idea, let's do it. What's happened in the last 5 or 6 years is other people have seen that we're doing that for ourselves and said, that looks really interesting. Can you come and create something that's a bit more structured and a bit more broad and actually sort of adopt this as an approach? And so we're now into that sort of kind of post-COVID era where we've now got projects where we've got lots of spaces empty. Contrary to popular belief, retail was declining anyway pre-COVID. Where we're at now, we probably would have been at in 5, 10 years anyway. It's just that COVID pressed fast forward and we weren't ready for it. The other thing to say is that a lot of smaller town centres and some of the better district centres, if they were doing well before COVID, actually a lot of them are actually doing all right now. They might not be as high end as we want them to. It might not be paying the rents we want them to, but actually the vacancy rates in a lot of them aren't actually that bad. The places that have really suffered the biggest casualties of COVID were the nationals, the multiples. And what they were doing was two things. One was they were occupying often bigger spaces, so it's much more obvious if they've gone. You maybe don't notice maybe that sort of 6 metre wide shopping unit empty in the middle of a parade. If it's not in too bad a condition, you do notice the empty Debenhams because it's massive. And the other thing was that they inflated property values for a long time. They were the only show in town and they were the ones who were pushing up all the prices. And now that they've gone, the prices haven't necessarily dropped everywhere. Again, contrary to popular belief, plenty of demand, but a lot of that demand's coming from independents. So what we did was create something called Pop-Up Wales. And what we sought to do was this a bit like kind of I think it was, I can't remember if it was Giuliani or Bloomberg, no broken windows in New York. And sort of our thing was, well, we should start thinking about a no empty shops. I will get in now, we're nowhere near no empty shops. What we're trying to do is that this is the foothills of getting to there and a sort of a trial of an approach. And what we're trying to achieve with it on the left-hand side there really is kind of 5 core outcomes. One is about if you do this and do it well, and we've done 60 odd of these now across South Wales, we know that they can increase footfall. It may not be that footfall isn't just about the space itself. It's about driving footfall to the stuff that's around it. We know that they can improve dwell time. So once we've got people coming in, that they stay longer, hopefully, and therefore hopefully spend more. But the big one for me that I really feel like these pop-ups do is that softer one, but actually it's about perceptions. It's about not having places boarded up. It's about having activity. It's about having the lights on. And it's often the less sexy one that funders like, but actually it's probably the biggest impact that this sort of approach makes is a confidence thing, both for investors, for consumers, but for other people who are there as well. It's sort of that rising tide floats all boats. And of course, through doing it, you're creating opportunities for people to then take those spaces and try an idea, try a project, try a business, whatever it might be. But the other thing we found through doing it is that about 80 or 90% of the ones we've done now, and we're 63, I think we're on at the moment, round about 80 to 85% of them go to commercial long-term let. Now, you've got no way of knowing that they might have done that anyway if you hadn't done a pop-up. But the fact that it's very high and that other places have done that shows that, it's the kind of paint the whole thing Magnolia effect if you're trying to sell your house. It's kind of that thing of if people can psychologically sort of see that the space is in use, there's people in there, it's making money, doing whatever, then it kind of seems to make it more likely that it goes for long-term commercial let. So how it works, the landlord, the benefits for the landlord, they get to keep the space on the market. We're just doing temporary things so they can keep it on with their estate agent, whatever. While it's in meanwhile use, pop-up use, we're keeping it warm, secure, maintained for them, so it's not deteriorating. They're saving on empty business rates, which in some places can be quite significant. They're also saving on utility standing charges, which if any of you own properties, you'll know have been fairly eye-watering over the last year, even if you don't flick a light switch on. And then, as I said, with that other one, that we're finding that it's actually more lettable in a commercial sense in the long run. Not necessarily to the person you put in as a pop-up, though it might be. It might go to somebody else afterwards, but the fact is it's going for commercial let. And how that works is what we've created is a kind of what are the barriers? Having done these for ourselves, how are we going to make this easy for other people? So the first thing we did was we created a kind of fill in the blanks meanwhile lease. Because if you're only going into a space for 3 months, even if you've got a really commercially viable product, there's a good chance you're not going to make back enough money to cover your costs and all of your upfront costs of going in, one of which might be 1,200-1,500 quid, maybe 2 grand's worth of legal fees. So we created, maybe not eliminating legals, but to try and get the cost down, we created like a fill in the blanks meanwhile lease, which we've tried and tested and we've tweaked over time to what normally happens if you're leasing a space is the landlord gives you theirs from their solicitor, you give it to your solicitor, you haggle and you try and meet somewhere in the middle. What we did was commissioned a solicitor to say, start in the middle and try and create something that gives a reasonable degree of protection to the person who's going in as a pop-up. So the landlord can't waltz in every minute if they want to, but equally so understanding this is just a filler and the landlord's got to be able to show people around and keep it on the market. They're all done on easy and easy out terms. It's haggled on a basic project by project basis. We normally start on the basis of 3 months followed by a 6-week rolling break after that, tenant only. And they're done on usually on peppercorn rents. We are finding that some just don't want to do that. They will not do it without you paying them something, but generally we start on the basis if they're done on a peppercorn rent. The occupant then, whoever the end user is, they're responsible for the business rates and utilities, and if there is a bid in the area, they would also pay the bid levy. The landlord insures the building. That's usually in the landlord's interest because often the people doing this are very small and the landlord knows that, you know, if the building were to burn down, they know that it's definitely covered for rebuild costs. The landlord can, if they want to, pass that on through an insurance rent. We generally sort of say, look, you're making a big saving here, so you know you keep it insured. But the occupant then insures all their activities. They insure their equipment. They insure for public liability, employee liability. So it's kind of a no-brainer for landlords. It's very risky, it's risk-free. If anything is longer than 6 months, we get them to opt out of the Landlord Tenant Act, so they know they're covered for that. And generally, where we put end users in, they're usually in on a license, so it's not even a lease usually. So the model we normally take is we take a lease. We've got a non-profit vehicle which takes the lease on the space and it sub-licenses to the end user. If we have got somebody who's a bit bigger, a bit more stable, they sometimes will do a direct deal with the landlord directly, and we just act as a broker. But you know, there's a way of doing it. But either way, the landlord's protected. But the other area then that we've sort of found that was a big barrier was that a lot of what's sitting empty is in really poor condition. And again, you might have an amazing product to go in, but actually you're not going to make the money back on capital works in 3 months. Now, you might be there for 2 years. There's nothing to say the lease itself could be 5 years if you want to. It's the break point in the lease is the important thing. And that's usually that 3 months followed by rolling 6 weeks. The initial 3 months, by the way, is to allow us enough time to do works on the property and still do something with it in case somebody gives us notice on day one. And so what we've done is with the bulk of the budgets we've had out of place is to have a budget for compliance works. And effectively that's to make it safe to go in. So it's usually the electrics, and virtually every premises we're taking on now, the electrics have to be condemned because the regulations have changed. And so actually you're rewiring it. If there's gas in there, you're checking the gas boiler's fine. You're testing the water. If it's been empty for 2 years, so if you drink it, it's not going to kill you. It's, you know, maybe changing the locks, repairing glazing, and sort of basic cosmetics, carpentry, painting, bit of signage, that type of stuff. So essentially you can go in, we white box it, and off you go. So that's basically the concept of how it works, and I'll just whip through for the last 5 minutes just some examples of some of the spaces we've done. So this is one of the first ones we did. It was a big old empty nightclub in Swansea, so before and after, left and right. So inside at the top left, it was a big empty nightclub. We put a load of street food traders in there. This is going back about 7-8 years ago now, and we put some live music in. We ran a pop-up bar in there, which is how we paid for the space. It's a bit like a version of what is now places like Founders and Co and things like that. They've done it on a budget, but it was kind of a sawdust on the floor version of that. And then you can see a lovely bit of 90s architecture there in the bottom left. And that sort of prompted the landlord to do kind of a bit of a funky paint job on the outside and bring a bit of life to the street and just make it a bit more interesting. This is another one we did in Swansea, which was an old empty cafe, again, before and after, left and right. So it was in the ownership of the university. They won't mind me saying this. It got very universityified. Everything was different shades of grey. And it had been empty for a long time. And on the right-hand side is what we did with it, which is a bit of a paint job, bit of wood, kind of some reclaimed furniture. And that's now permanent. That's where I'm actually sitting talking to you from now, in the meeting room next to it. That's now a permanent, that's a social enterprise cafe in Swansea. Other types of users then, so arts users are very, very good at pop-ups. So they're really good at kind of working with no money, doing things really fast. So the top left one there was in the shopping mall in Swansea. The rateable value on that was colossal. So even if we did put an end user, it used to be the Disney store, so that tells you who could afford the rates in it. We couldn't put anybody selling stuff in there because even if we made it rent-free, the rates they would still have to pay on it were eye-watering. And so we put an art gallery in it and a non-profit use, which qualified for rate relief, which meant that we could bring life to it at low cost. And we did that with a variety of users. The students doing their end of year show, which is the picture that's there, but it was community groups. But we made it white box, worked really well. Top right, you often find a lot of those. That was kind of, built on spec, never filled. You can see the breeze block walls were still there in the background. We did that with the university, their science department, their physics department. We did a sort of a pop-up science gallery around the theme of time. So we had a DeLorean from Back to the Future and Doctor Who's TARDIS and various other things. But in the back was all their experiments and their kind of community outreach. Bottom left was a sort of art talk space, and bottom right is your sort of typical white box art gallery type pop-up. The third sector, the other ones, were really good at doing stuff thriftily, fast, at low cost. So we've set up a few of these, and these are brilliant footfall drivers. Individually, they don't make money themselves very much because they're all on grant funding, but they're brilliant footfall drivers for the stuff that's around them. So top left is an anxiety hub, which is one of the more recent ones we've done. Top right was a library of things that we set up in Swansea, hugely successful. Bottom left, we worked with the job centre, and they were finding there was a stigma for a lot of people who didn't want any benefits. They just wanted a job, but they wouldn't go in the job centre because of the stigma of kind of, well, I'm not one of those people, I just want a job. So what we did was split off the I'm looking for a job function from the benefits bit, and it completely revolutionised their service. And we put the I'm looking for a job bit in a pop-up, and that worked brilliantly. And the one that's probably been the most successful is the dementia hub we set up with a third sector charity, because of course the people go into that are not the people with dementia, they're the people who are caring for the people with dementia. And they're probably people around about my age, a little bit older. They've got disposable income, they go in for a coffee next door, they're buying that birthday present while they're there, and it's a brilliant footfall driver. They can be for businesses too. Top left is the one that stereotypically people think pop-up shops are, which is like your stereotypical pop-up Christmas shop, which of course you can do. But the top right, we're not purist about pop-up. We're taking it on the basis that there's too many empty shops and we want fewer of them. We don't really care if it's 3 months. If you want to go in and take a 10-year lease, go in and take a 10-year lease. It's about filling spaces, and that top right one was one of those, which was they did go in and take a 10-year lease. Bottom left was in Bridgend, where we just got a load of different craft market traders and put them in one shop, and they act like almost like a mini craft supermarket. And she won't mind me saying it, she's given me permission to do it. But in the bottom right, it's also a really cheap way to fail. So the bottom right was somebody we were working with, a student. She really wanted to do a plant shop, and we're thinking, I really don't think this is going to work. She was about to sign a 2-year lease and said, try it in a pop-up and just try it, see if it works. It didn't work, and she was, thank you so much, because I can give you 1 month's notice, walk away. She left owing a few £100. It's not going to sort of bankrupt you. Occasionally, though, you just can't do them. So we put people into spaces. Sometimes you can't. This one was too far gone. And so all we could do on this one was just we put film on the windows and backlit it. It was just in such bad condition, but it was still a way of activating that corner at night time. And you can see that little shadow in the window. I didn't dare put video into this, but that sort of moved across the kind of screen, and it gave you sort of a moving thing. And we had it on a timer, so it would turn itself off at midnight every night. So just very quickly in the last minute, then just some of the key challenges. It's massively, unlike any other bit of work we do, it's hugely reliant on behavioural factors, because we can't make landlords do anything. Local authorities can, but we can't. We're a private company. So behavioural factors are a big thing. A lot of this is just trying to sell it and convince them of the idea, and that's hard. That's by far the most difficult bit. A lot of the spaces are in quite poor quality. They're not well maintained. They're not looked after. The reason we started off in shopping malls is they generally are looked after and well maintained, but we're now out into other places where a lot of the time they're not great. Big ones are difficult. Those big old Debenhams are expensive, very, very difficult to do. business rates is not fit for purpose and is not structured. And Welsh Government are completely in agreement with me when I talk to them on this as a local authorities, but it's like trying to turn an oil tanker. Everybody knows it's got to change, but it's not going to change quick. And when we're doing these spaces up, we still have to pay the empty business rates on them because they're classed as being empty, and different local authorities interpret it in different ways. Some give rate relief to non-profits, some don't. Within local authorities, we're usually working with economic development and regen who love the approach, but then maybe their finance department isn't on board with it because they're having to give you rate relief, or the planning department doesn't get it. So often you find that you've got one hand not working with the other hand. In the last 2 years, inflation's been a massive problem for trades because the cost of doing spaces, we could do a pop-up 3 years ago for about £5,000. You can't now because it's just too expensive. I mean, the electrics on its own is probably going to cost you that much, let alone anything else. A big one we found is end user creativity. So there's one thing being entrepreneurial. It's another thing being able to look at a space saying, I might only have this for 3 months. How do I make it work when I've only got a guarantee of 3 months or 6 weeks or whatever it might be? And that's actually, the art sector and the third sector are very good at that. The private sector, small independents, it's a lot harder than it perhaps is in those other two sectors. And then the last two then are sort of outcome focused things. One is that we're reliant on this for local authorities generally don't have their own money for this. So a lot of it's coming from SPF at the moment. And despite SPF being lauded as being much lighter touch than European funding, it is still totally output driven. And actually, it's turning it into tick box exercises. And what that turns you into, that's not the way the world works commercially. It's, you're having to do things at very short time scales. And even though pop-ups themselves are quick, the timescale of when you want to do that property, which is the real problem, one might not fit the window when the funding's available for, and that output-based focus of it makes life quite tricky. And what we're really trying to do is take that longer-term view of outcomes about improved perceptions, reduced, improving footfall, all those sorts of things I said at the beginning. So I've gone through that at 100 miles an hour. There's a huge amount of detail underneath it. I'm more than happy to answer questions at the end of it. If anybody wants to look at what we're doing, we're urbanfoundry.co.uk. You can find all our socials on there, and we'll pick up questions at the end. But I think we're moving straight on now to the next presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. More than happy then to talk to people again at the end of the session.
Brilliant, thank you, Ben. I realise there's a lot there to fit in the time, but that was a really helpful overview of what you've been up to and how you're tackling the challenges and the challenges that still remain. So yeah, I'm sure there's plenty there for people to take away, but also yes, if that's prompted any questions, do drop them in the Q&A and we'll pick those up. But I'll hand over now to Wendy. I think probably quite a bit of overlap between Wendy and Ben's experience, but great to hear about what she's been up to working across the border. And over to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I think I'll focus on a little bit more on specific projects and how we tackle those rather than that kind of more strategic overview from Ben. So hopefully that's like a helpful comparison. So yeah, I work in the regeneration team at Bath and North East Somerset Council. I will touch firstly on the structure of our team because that's kind of quite key to how we deliver the projects and the Vacant Unit Action Project. We are exclusively externally grant funded. We have a mix of local, regional and national funding, and we often have to kind of mix and match and package that to deliver the various projects and the approaches that we take in terms of using revenue and capital. We're a multidisciplinary team, so we've got urban designers, planners, transport planners, heritage, culture and arts, and that's really key to how we function as well because we kind of work holistically and enjoy having that kind of multidisciplinary oversight on different projects to kind of strengthen them and make them better, and more well considered for an area. We work across the whole of the district, so to put it into context, most of you will know Bath, but we also have these large market towns, Cambridgeshire, Midsummer, Norton and Radstock, as well as a number of local centres, and we have active regeneration and high street renewal projects across most of those at the moment. The approach we take is to deliver phased projects. So we've got projects kind of at every stage of delivery at the moment, from testing feasibility and concept ideas through to pilot testing ideas on street and in places, through to delivering and designing long-term strategies or master plans. And to be honest, the vacant units kind of come in at each of those stages of that process to kind of test and feedback into the loop of project development. I'll firstly touch on where this all started. So as kind of Ben mentioned, COVID absolutely accelerated some of the issues on the high street. And we had in Bath City Centre specifically, the council owns a lot of retail units, and we found a massive increase in vacancies during the pandemic. And we were asked to kind of react to that. It was nothing like this had really been done before, so it was a real challenge, as Ben kind of touched on, to try and get internal teams to speak to each other and agree on an approach. So this was a very important testing stage to understand what was possible. We worked with our commercial property colleagues who looked after these units, and this was a completely new approach for them. So we used the window licensing process, which allowed us to use the retail frontage and a meter back from it to do these kind of pop-up installations. So some of the ones that you can see on the page where we did these really fun balloon interventions, biodegradable balloon interventions, were a really quick and easy way to just brighten up the street and make it a little bit less bleak in some of these locations. And it also meant we could engage local artists and event organisers who were otherwise out of work to help us deliver some of those interventions. Another project I specifically want to touch on is Share and Repair in the middle. So Share and Repair is a charity based in Bath, and they lend out various kind of household goods and things that people may need. And it's more a kind of sustainable approach without everyone having to buy an individual thing and have it in their house. They got in touch with us and said, we love our new unit. We've completely exhausted any of the funding we had to try and get the internal fit out done, and we just think nobody's noticing us. So we used a small amount of grant funding to work with them to do some external improvements and a pop-up festive window display that kind of helped them and some of the people that work for them kind of imagine how that window could work longer term. And now they're kind of a lot more creative in using the things that they share and repair in those windows to kind of generate interest and to kind of spread the word about what they do. A really small scale intervention, but I thought was useful just to kind of touch on the breadth of different types of installations, is this one here that's kind of painted in front of the shutters. This is a private landlord. The Business Improvement District got in touch with us and said, look, we're kind of having comments from local businesses around this space. How can we improve it really quickly? And the landlord gave us the option to have the doors open for 4 hours or something in an afternoon. So we had to have a really quick, immediately deliverable solution that just improved the look of that space during Christmas when everyone was obviously out for their Christmas shopping. And we just got a local artist who hand drew it all, and it did so low value, really, really, really fast, and just made a bit of a difference. Two of the interventions that are really kind of relevant to the placemaking aspect of what we do. Firstly, this one in the top corner, we use the opportunity of a vacant unit in the kind of red line of our master plan site to share some ideas of what we were doing. We shared some of the concept ideas for the initial ideas of the master plan, and it was really helpful to be able to position exactly, you are here and this is what we're proposing for these locations, whilst also just filling the front of a unit that otherwise had massive compliance works and we wouldn't have been able to do anything with. And a kind of progression on from that is the graphic at the bottom. More recently, we've delivered this in a window hand painted by a local artist to kind of build that place brand of this Milsom Quarter as part of this long-term strategy for the area that the businesses were kind of wanting us to kind of help with that place branding. And we've used some of the typography that's based on historic text in the area, as well as little icons which kind of share the types of businesses in that location. Our next step on then from the window installations was moving on to more pop-up spaces. So we've had 2 pop-ups in the centre of Bath previously. This was again run by our commercial property colleagues, but they hadn't had any commercial interest in them for years. They did need some kind of compliance works doing, which we did, and we also kind of gave them a lick of paint on the internal and external spaces. But we also took a really low value approach to delivering these improvements. We didn't have a massive budget to do any of this, but we thought what will make the most immediate impact and make it kind of as flexible for different uses as possible. So we sourced secondhand furniture that could be really flexible, not fixed to walls, could be used for various different layouts. As you can see, we've had things from a jazz band through to kind of festive retailers and a climate hub in these spaces. And we actually got these tables that you can see in this image here, specifically made for a certain dimension, so that they were 0.5 meter by 1 meter, and we could use them as kind of a kit of parts, Lego, to kind of build the space, and also allowed us to communicate with any of the pop-up users how they could lay out the space, and so that they could get in. They'd already planned how they were going to lay it out, and they could get in and do it and get out quickly, because lots of these pop-ups were really short. What we found doing these pop-ups was that spreading the word internally was really, really important. We wouldn't have been in touch with the Climate Hub had we not have shared this idea with our environmental sustainability colleagues. We wouldn't have known about the jazz band and the music festival happening nearby if we hadn't have spoken to our events colleagues. So very much and our business and skills colleagues were absolutely key in getting some local businesses and local makers into the retail pop-up. So spreading the word internally was absolutely key to the success of getting varied and different uses on the site. I'll touch on one of our projects that was a slightly different approach. So this is based in Midsummer Norton, which is one of our market towns. We'd started engagement on our High Street Heritage Action Zone project there. Along the high street. This unit is actually outside of the red line of that project. A local landlord based in Australia, I think, had heard about it through the grapevine that we were starting these developing these ideas for some longer term large capital investment in improvements on the high street. And he got in touch to say, I want to do something slightly more interesting in my land holding here. He had a few units and a small car park. But I'm firstly in Australia. Secondly, don't really know how to go about it. Don't know what I'm allowed to do. Don't know what I'm not allowed to do. Don't know how to get an interesting user in here. We put our heads together with the town council and the community trust, who were looking for some space to do some community activities. We facilitated those conversations with that landlord and negotiated a really small rent, although with rent relief for the first 6 months, because we put in the capital improvements internally and externally. And from this space, we managed to create this really cool and interesting community hub that's had things like, it has counselling sessions in there, arts exhibitions. We host community engagement. So I included this small design your own high street drawing that one of the kids attending one of our engagement sessions in the unit had done, which I thought was really fun and kind of inspired by the frontage. We engaged 2 local artists, and they worked together to design the facade. So one was a graphic artist and one looked specifically at typography, and they worked with our local community steering group to develop the ideas that were all touched on the history of Midsummer Norton and its industrial heritage. And they were really clear to not be too shy, so make an impact in what is otherwise a reasonably grey space. And we found that really paid off. I've included an image of Soma Printing, which are actually their next door neighbours, who were inspired by the approach that had been taken on Unit 14 and have done their own really fun facade design there. So yeah, we were, I think by working really, really, really closely with the town council and the community trust, we were able to establish something that they really bought into, and they now run the space themselves. We just helped them with the initial grant funding and getting it off the ground. A similar but slightly different approach was taken in Keynsham. So we had, again, a Heritage High Street Action Zone there. This unit was Baines owned. It was in the ground floor of a large residential block, and they really struggled to get some of these retail units taken. So it was very much on our radar. We use some grant funding to do the internal and external improvements, working really closely again with the town council there, who actually the town council building actually backs on to this unit. So they had a really investment in that space. We put a slightly higher investment in this space than some of the others because we really wanted it to work as a making space. So the interior image that I've included in the bottom right, you can see we put in these pegboards really specifically because they can be used for art installations and really flexibly. Loads of storage, and the storage drawers actually can also function as exhibition and exhibition space for museums, as pull-out exhibitions. And in the back area there, we've got a kitchenette, and then we've also got an artist sink, so a making sink, because we wanted to really make sure that this could function for that making that we anticipated. And one of the most successful things that's happened in the space is an artist in residence program. So we had 2 local artists who would usually just work from home in kind of cramped spaces in their spare rooms and things. We had them working on the site as a studio for several months, and that culminated in an exhibition of their work that they'd created on site. So that was a really kind of brilliant example of how it could function in those 2 ways, and made it really visible that kind of making an activity was happening on the street. And as you can see with the facade design, we made it so that people could spot it from miles away, so that they knew something more interesting was happening in the space by going for the bright orange, slightly adventurous bright orange. And one of the other things that's has happened in the space, which is completely new to this area, was a pop-up museum. So the image in the centre bottom there, the Heritage Services team within the council held some artefacts and historic records relevant to Keynsham and its history, and these had never been shown in the town. So people would have historically had to travel to Bath or other places to see them, or they'd be in the archive. So this was a brilliant opportunity to bring those out and show them to the local community and have it on site for a good kind of 3 weeks. And that was a collaboration with the town council, and we, between our team and the town council teams, there was always somebody on site to kind of open the museum each day. So it was a real kind of show of collaboration to make that accessible to the community. And finally, I'll touch on our space in Bath that we currently have. So Studio 22 is a unit which is part of a block that will be in the next kind of 5 to 10 years developed as a museum in the middle of one of our master plan areas. So we know that this unit won't necessarily be a retail unit kind of 5 years from now. So we kind of got agreement from our internal teams that if we could take it on without paying a rent, but covering utilities and business rates, could we operate it as a flexible space between now and when it gets redeveloped? And we managed to negotiate that agreement internally. And this functions Monday to Thursday as an office kind of space for internal Baines teams. So Heritage Services, who will eventually deliver the museum, often work from there. We do community and stakeholder engagement from the space. The regeneration team is based there a few days a week. And also our refugee resettlement teams as well have several meetings with new refugees in this space, because it's a lot more comfortable than some of the other council offices to visit and find. And that makes us kind of really accessible and visible on the high street. You'll know that the regeneration team are going to be there Monday and Tuesdays. So local businesses, stakeholders, anyone else, the public can kind of pop their head round and ask about projects or see what's going on. Friday through to Sunday, it's operating as a pop-up space for either retailers or charities. There's a small rent for that 3-day hire, and it allows local makers to kind of test out ideas and see if a retail space would work for them. It's free for use for the charities over that long weekend, and we really love this image in the top left, which was drawn by the local youth climate hub, who took it on for a long weekend, and they had people registering to vote, and there was climate education and upcycling and things, and just something more interesting that they wouldn't get the opportunity to do otherwise, happening on the high street rather than just that kind of retail environment. And I also included an image at the bottom there of us using it as our regeneration base for some of our CPD placemaking sessions as well, so inviting people into the space. So really used in completely different ways throughout the week, and it always means that every weekend there's something different, so there's kind of an incentive for people to visit this part of the city. So that's me, a whistle-stop tour of some of our projects, but yeah, happy to take any questions on lots of the intricacies that I wouldn't have had a chance to cover in the time.
Brilliant, thank you, Wendy. Again, really helpful experience and examples there of work you've been doing across your towns. Yeah, please do drop your questions in. We've got one in the chat, so I'll start with that one. So Ben, perhaps for you, have you had any experience of success using pop-ups in vacant premises that are still under lease by a previous tenant, where the landlord continues to receive rent? This scenario often occurs when national retailers vacate a property. In such cases, landlords lack a financial incentive to reoccupy the premises quickly. Is that something that you've come across?
Yes, so the answer to this is going to be a politician's answer of yes and no. We've had some where, particularly where it's been in, perhaps they've owned a parade of shops or an indoor mall, where it's been under rent and their cost benefit analysis of it as a landlord has been, we'd rather allow them to surrender the lease and we'll have it back in, where effectively they because they would rather not have an empty blighting premises pulling the rest of it down and forego the rent they would otherwise have got. In all the instances where that's happened, there hasn't been long left on the lease, where there've been none where they've had like another 20, 30 years to go with no breaks. But there've been a few where there've been maybe like a year or two left where they've like, you know what, we'll just let them off because it means we can actually get it back into use. We'd rather that than it sit empty but pay us. It's more complex with others. We haven't done it where somebody's in a, you know, kind of still got 20 years to go. In theory, if it's within their lease with the landlord, the tenant could do a deal with us for pop-up. The main reason, to be honest, we haven't done that is because there's so many that have just reverted back to the landlord anyway, and it's just so much easier and neater. It's still not easy, but it's neater and easier where you just do a deal with a landlord. So until we kind of run out of those, we've kind of focused on the ones where it's a simpler job to do. We have had a few where they've gone into administration and we've just gotten nowhere. When they're in administration or in liquidation, you're dealing with liquidators and they just don't want, so far they just don't want to give us the time of day. So in those instances we've had no success, but in the other two, so yes and no, we've had some success. I suspect as we do more of them, we will find that, you know, we're running out of the low-hanging fruit and we will start getting into some of these more complex ones where there's more legal issues, and that will come down to then how is their lease drafted with the landlord in terms of the tenant. I can also see one which I'll answer quickly because it's right below it. Would you be able to work with authorities towns in North Wales? Yes, in principle, yes. By all means, get in touch with us.
Great, thank you. Wendy, did you have anything to add for that first question at all?
Yeah, all I was going to say, where we've been in the position with the longer leases that there hasn't really been much scope to get out of, and we haven't really been able to get in touch with the leaseholder in any great detail. We have got permission from our property team, sometimes ask for forgiveness rather than permission, to put in some of the externally applied decals. Just go for a great graphic approach, stick it on the outside, you don't need access. And if you get told off one day, you could take it down and really quickly. So that's my kind of cheat way to at least brighten up the street if there's nothing you can do with the internal space.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Fab. Another question here aimed towards Wendy. Have you had any experience in your town/Bath on vacant units under private ownership, and how you as a regen team overcame that hurdle? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the examples that I touched on, Unit 14, and in fact some that we're developing in some of our other market towns are private ownership. And actually, if you can get in touch with the landlord, we've actually occasionally found them easier to work with, because they don't have to follow the same kind of rules and regulations and licenses and things that we as a local authority do if we're using our own buildings. So it's not necessarily always a hurdle, is what I would say. Naturally, there are always the challenges of if you don't really know who owns the property and they're absent and you can't get in touch with them. But I think our main learning from that, where we've got in touch or kind of made contact with landlords who actually are interested in doing something, or if they're not interested, they're just happy for you to crack on if they under the kind of parameters that Ben set out earlier. That's almost always come out of us doing community engagement on other things. So it's just kind of word of mouth and it gets back to them eventually. So it's always just been us being very contactable, spreading the word about a wider project, making it kind of known that there is grant funding available in places. And even in both instances where we've done kind of large long-term projects with private landlords, that's come out of the back of us doing engagement on something completely different. We didn't know they were an opportunity. We had no idea that they'd be up for doing anything. And they just heard about our team and the fact that we might have some funding available and we might be able to do something with it. And that's where that's come from. But I appreciate if the landlord is absent and you have no way of really getting in touch with them, then it's a really tricky situation.
So yeah,
I'll just very briefly add
Yeah,
to
go
that
for
is
it.
that actually the vast majority of the ones we've done have been privately owned. I think we've done maybe 4 that are in local authority ownership, but of the 60 odd we've done, the rest have all been in private ownership.
Yeah,
It can be
great.
easier, can definitely be easier.
Yeah. So it can be done. And then I suppose building on what you were just saying there, Wendy, sort of where to start with these things. If somebody's sort of heard what you've been talking about and think, well, where do I start with this? In some ways, just sort of start with some things that gets people talking and get some action happening, and an opportunity for those people, whether they're landlords or people who perhaps have a business idea or a community group, where you can find out who those people are. Is that sort of
Yeah,
the starting
basically
point?
get on the ground,
Yeah.
and you'll meet people who know people who have ideas, and that tends to be how it works. And also don't be afraid of having those conversations where you don't necessarily have the grant funding in place. So I think with local authorities, there's always this fear of kind of going out and kind of consulting on something if you don't necessarily know the funding is in place. But you can be really honest about that and say, well, in some instances, a particular community group might have access to funding that we wouldn't. Like if they're a charity or another kind of specific kind of cultural or arts use, for example, but they wouldn't know where to begin in terms of putting in the business case. So we might be able to help with that because we've got experience of business cases. So I think starting those conversations, and then most of the best projects just come from nowhere. They haven't been planned.
Yeah. Anything you'd add to that, Ben?
I can see this, so there are, but probably I can see there's at least 3 more questions. So I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to move on to the next
Yeah,
ones.
sure, we can come back to it. Thanks for all the questions. Um,
I think the
is
next one's about
there,
rates relief.
yeah, is there a clear line for when business rates relief kick in? Do the pop-up maker spaces pay full rates? I think you touched on this, Ben, between those organisations that do pay the rates and that don't. Do you want to
Yeah,
explain that a
so
bit more?
there's a couple of ways of doing it. So sometimes we'll take a space and we'll run it ourselves. We've created a non-profit vehicle to do that because we as Urban Foundry, we're a for-profit company. So we created a special purpose vehicle for those instances. And those are ones like that employment hub one where there might be multiple users within one space. It's not one organization. So in that employment hub, it is the job centre and the local authority, but it's also kind of non-profit organizations that help people into jobs, and then they're all in the space. So we took it like an umbrella, and then we can apply for the rate relief. If you're a third sector organisation, you can apply for rate relief, and if you're there are certain rateable values below which you just get rate relief anyway. Also, if you're in Wales, retail, hospitality, leisure, and bear in mind all of my experience is Wales. If anybody's on the call outside of Wales, my experience is a Welsh context of doing this, so I don't know the rules in England. They're probably similar, but they're not identical, so I'll leave that to Wendy. If you're a for-profit user going into a space, then unless the space qualifies for rates relief anyway, in other words, it's under a certain threshold in Wales, which I think is about 6,000 at the moment, rateable value, then you will pay business rates from day one. What a lot of people don't realise going into space, a lot of people look at the rateable value and it immediately frightens the hell out of them. And a lot of what we end up doing is saying, no, the rateable value is not what you pay. That's what the calculation's based on. You need to take a percentage of that. And on top of that, you're only paying, which a lot of people don't realise, you're only paying for the time that you're in occupation. So if you're only going in for 4 weeks, a lot of people just see the horrifying bill for the year and think, I can't do that. And say, yeah, but you're only paying for a month's worth of that. You're not liable for it from the day you come out. So when you look at it on a by the day basis, actually the amount is not astronomical. It would be if you had to pay that amount perhaps all the time for a small user, but actually for a lot of them, when you break it down to them by the day, it's not huge. The biggest barrier we find for rates is that we always have this period of usually up to a month where we have to take it from the landlord and we have to do work to it. We can't put anyone in, but we're liable for the rates during that period, which shoots the cost up because we have to pay full empty business rates in that period because we can't do anything with it while we're having works done. If it's, because often the times they're dangerous, the electrics are shot or whatever. And at the moment, I haven't found a good way around that. And we've got this bizarre scenario where government is funding us to do these projects and we're giving half the money straight back to the government. So we have to pay the empty business rates. And at the moment, that's kind of the only way of doing it while we're doing the works. The other problem you've got at the moment, which a lot of people don't realise, is that if a local authority gives you rate relief, there is an actual cost to the local authority of giving you that rate relief. They have to still pay those rates or a proportion of them to central government. So at times when local authorities are cash strapped, it's not like, oh, it's not just a lost opportunity cost, it is an actual cost to them of giving you the relief. Now, if you're a big city, it's probably marginal, but if you're a smaller place, that probably adds up quite quickly. And so there's business rates basically are not designed for this approach, and the system is not fit for purpose. But that is a problem. There's a disincentive for landlords sometimes because they will get 3 months worth of rate relief after a property's been in occupation for a minimum of 6 months. So a lot of the time the place becomes vacant, but then they don't want to give it to you for pop-up because they want to use up their 3 months of free relief before they then give it to you for pop-up, which isn't in the interest of the area. We kind of want to stick something in it from day one to get activity, but they don't want to because they want to use up their 3 months rate relief. There's also a problem then when we're on short-term funding cycles, is those 3 months might take us beyond when the funding's available, when we've already got 9 months of funding maybe. So that is a massive problem. The rate system is a huge issue that is just makes this difficult. It's not stopping us doing it, but it does make it unnecessarily complicated in some places, and where it is very difficult is in those peak land value spaces, the places that used to be a Debenhams or whatever. You can divvy up spaces, you can go to the VOA, and you can say this is no longer one massive department store, we're parceling this up into umpteen different 6x10 spaces for mini traders. But there are two issues with that. One is it's really slow. It takes ages to do that. And in the meantime, you get a horrific rate spill, which you're on the hook for paying until you can get relief, which you'll probably get. But can you cope with the cash flow in the meantime to pay it and then claim it back? And secondly, sometimes the landlord doesn't want you to do that because they might only want you in for 3 months. I don't want you mucking about with the rates because it's going to make it difficult for some of them to come in who will take the full space and will pay the full amount. So if you think it's permanently going to be divvied up, it's worth doing. But if you think it's only going to temporarily be divvied up, gets a bit trickier. The other thing we're beginning to find now is a lot of local authorities are not giving rate relief to non-profits in the way that it used to be. If you're a non-profit, you basically got it on the nod. And we've had a couple, I won't name them, but we've had a couple of local authorities now where they're just not giving any rate relief on the basis they're saying, well, this isn't our money that we've had. We're commissioning you through us, but the money's come from central government, but we're on the hook for the rate relief. So you've had external money, so you pay full rate relief because we know you've had that external money because we're the ones who commissioned you. But it's not an efficient use of funds, but it's just what we're having to do. We're having to just play the game on it.
So I get the impression, Ben, if you had one plea to make the whole process smoother, it would be something around
business rates.
Look at rate relief.
One of the reasons we did this, and somebody's asked a question about platform places, which is the approach in England they're using on these rental auctions at the moment, but it's relevant to the rates discussion. One of the reasons we did it is we saw people cynically doing rates mitigation schemes where what they would do is have an empty premises, tick a couple of boxes in the corner and say, oh, it's being rented to a charity for storage, and the charity would then get rate relief. And so it's like, well, we'll use the same loophole, but for a more progressive way of doing it, which is why we've done it. And that's the massive loophole. I'm sure they've thought about this, but that's the problem I can see with that auctions approach is, I'll just shove a charity in and then you can't auction it. But actually, if you do that positively, lovely, in the way we've done it with some of the charities, because they're doing stuff. But if they do it in a way of, oh, we'll just shove a load of boxes in the corner, because the rate system, it can't have its cake and eat it. So they love coming after you, say, you've got a router in the corner, that means the space is in use, you pay us rent. But the same reasoning for that, which is what they want to do as local authorities to stop you from not paying rent, to say it is in use, you've got to pay us rent, is say, there's a couple of boxes in the corner. By the same definition, it's in use, we get rate relief. So it is a problematic system. But yes, by far, that's the biggest one that needs addressing.
Yeah. The second part of that question, I'm not sure of the answer to that. I've got to be honest, around whether Welsh Government are bringing in similar legislation. If anyone from Welsh Government is on the call and wants to answer that, fine. If not, we'll seek to get back to you on that question. Roughly, what would be a minimum budget for bringing a small empty unit back into use? So what kind of figure are we starting at here? Sort of what would be a good sum of money to have to kick something off here? Wendy, have you got sort of thoughts around that?
I mean, 5 to 10,000 might do a decent job, to be honest. I mean, it depends how adventurous you want to be. I think part of it is about creativity. If you can have a design eye on it somewhere, be that interiors, exterior, whoever, local arts community group, then you can make a much bigger impact on a lower value. I think you don't want to do an expensive fit out, do the absolute bare minimum, because people will just mess it up and use it how they want to use it.
Yeah.
But if you can make an impact and put a little bit of money into design of the external space specifically, then that's like worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. And you mentioned a sort of emerging kit of parts that you did on one scheme. If that was something that was in place and you could move that from space to space, that could potentially save some money as well.
Yeah, bits of our kit have been and are in about 6, 7 of our different spaces, and they've all been split up and they've all been taken on by different community groups who just needed a whatever. Yeah, that was probably one of the best investments we ever made in that furniture.
Yeah.
And we've taken a similar approach. If we're starting to now, we've done enough of them that we're building up a kind of a kit of stuff that can just be moved around it, like movable items, furniture, chairs, tables, fire extinguishers, which every space needs, but you'll often end up with a space coming out and you say, well, we'll take them with us, keep them serviced, and they can go into the next one. Fire signage can be pulled off the wall and taken with you, those sorts of things, which all costs money. I would echo the same. I would say 5 to 10 plus VAT, but if you can't recover the VAT, bear that in mind. But we have done them cheaper. Occasionally, it's very rare in this country that landlords maintain their properties when they're empty. So if they've been empty for any period of time, they've just deteriorated. So you are getting into quite high costs of bringing spaces into use. The other problem at the moment is that the electricity, commercial electric legislation has changed. And so basically now, if you redo it, everywhere is non-compliant once you get to the point where it's got to be redone. So we're now finding that everywhere we're going, we're having to rewire, whereas before it might be you just need to change the fuses out and change a couple of plug sockets that were smashed. So basically every single one we've done in the last year has had to be rewired. Ways we've got around that with landlords is say, well, look, we're not taking the full building off you, we're maybe just taking the ground floor. We cannot rewire the whole building, it's just too expensive. But what we're going to do is just disconnect the upstairs mains, because whoever's coming in is going to have it condemned regardless. So it's not going to cost you any, lost tenant. But we can bring the ground floor up to spec so that, it's safe, and we'll just disconnect the upstairs so there's no electric upstairs or whatever. So we've done that in a few places. And the rest then is how far do you want to go? So yes, you could do signage, but also you can give places a bit of a lick of paint and say, well, actually, we can't do the sign, but we'll just black it out, or, kind of white it out, whichever you want to do. Some things have shot up in cost. So it used to be we'd clad everything in OSB board, but timber has become unbelievably expensive in the last 2 years. It's one of the things post-COVID has skyrocketed in cost. So the cafe I showed you at the beginning is covered in timber cladding, because we did it in 2020 during COVID. We were supposed to sign on the dotted line on the 1st of April 2020, which was a fun experience. But after sort of 6-9 months where you were allowed to do works on spaces, but we still weren't allowed out, we started doing it, and at that time timber still was okay, whereas now there's no way we'd put that amount of timber into space. It could be so expensive to do it. But a lot can be done with upcycling, begging, borrowing. You can't do that with stuff like electrics and gas, but you can do that with things like furniture. You can, have you got any mismeasured window panes in the glaziers that we'll just put a little bit of extra wood around the trim. There are some things you can't do. So like if the building's condemned, if it's derelict, you just can't do pop-up. It's just too expensive to do it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but pop-up maybe isn't your mechanism. Similarly, you can do food if all you need is a point of sale, if you're making the food somewhere else. But it would be a bad idea to go in and outfit a 20 grand commercial kitchen, which is what you need to spend in order to be compliant for food regs, when you've only got a 3-month security of tenure. I mean, but the first thing I'd say is you're out of your mind. Do not do that in a pop-up, because you could find yourself kicked out in 3 months. You'll never make that money back, no matter how good you are. So there are some things.
Yeah, just quickly, Ben. There's a question about traditional high street banks. Any experience of them potentially? The design makes them harder to occupy.
Yes,
Do you have
we
any
have.
experience
It
of that?
depends how they're configured. So we're doing one right now in Caerphilly. So there were 2 red lines, which are 2 things where we immediately, if we get it and we find it, we just give the keys back. One is asbestos and the other one is rack. If we find those, it's like too expensive to do it with pop-up. Here's the keys back, we can't do it. And we've got those built in the meanwhile. At least they're an immediate. We don't have to give you notice. There's the keys, we're gone. And some of the old banks have still got quite a lot of asbestos in, where they just kind of, because they've been there for so long, and you can have asbestos in a building and manage it, which a lot of them do. But obviously once you start doing it for a different use, you start drilling into walls and stuff, and then you have to have a full asbestos management. It just becomes too expensive. Banks, it depends how they're configured because they're built like fortresses. Safes, we just leave them where they are because they're just too expensive, just work around them. So some banks, you'll go in, you have a very small lobby area, then you've got your counter. Those are really difficult because that's where all the security stuff starts. Some of them have got a big lobby area, and then the back of it is where that security stuff is, where it's a bit easier then to use them because you're not taking out all that security stuff. So it depends how they've been configured. But yes, we've done a couple of banks, but some we've said no to because of the way they're configured internally. And again, it's just how that works. I can also see one of their own conservation areas, so I'll quickly do that. Yeah, you can do it. If it's listed, it gets a lot more complicated. But if it's within a conservation area and a lot not listed, we're doing one right now, actually, which is in a conservation area, which is, it depends to a large degree on the conservation officer you're dealing with. Some are far easier to deal with than others in local authorities. But in all of the areas we've done it so far, the conservation areas have been actually very easy to deal with and very positive and very constructive and helpful. And but I'm sure at some point we're going to come across someone who's not, and that might make it a bit more difficult. But so far, yes, it's been fine to do that. You have to be sensible, but yeah, we have done that so far.
Yeah. And Wendy, you've been doing all these sorts of things in Bath, which is probably one of the
all of the Bath examples I gave were in the World Heritage Site conservation area and all listed buildings. So we basically worked out how we can do all of it without getting any listed building consent, is our strategy, because that just speeds up the process. So that kind of gives you a design focus.
So be aware of what those challenges are and then look at how to work within those parameters.
Absolutely. And the same goes for planning, you know. So if you put signage up, put up signage that's below the size where you need planning permission. You know, there are simple workarounds like that to make your life easy.
And make everything temporary. And then you can always pull it down if anyone gets upset about it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, so much to cover there, and I think we've thank you for everyone for your questions. Hopefully we've answered them as best we can. If there is anything you want to follow up on, do just get in touch. And I just want to say a big thank you to Ben and Wendy for sharing your experience, a wealth of practical experience there. Max has helpfully dropped into the chat the next webinar, which is on placemaking green infrastructure, so do sign up for that. But thank you everybody for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks.